Hello, everyone. My name is Gilda Ross. I'm the Glenbard Student and Community Projects Coordinator. I am so excited to have you here with us tonight. This is a very important program. We had the honor of hearing Dr. Edlynn at noon today at the College of DuPage in a hybrid program, and everyone here is in for a real treat. Our ask of everyone who is interested, who has joined us tonight, is to please share the resource. Tell a friend who lives across the country or a relative or a neighbor next door that this resource is free to everyone. There's never any registration. And what you'll find here is a lineup of some of the most important thought leaders in the country, always people who can communicate well, just like Emily Edlynn. We'll be talking about her important book tonight on autonomy, supportive parenting. I want to thank the sponsors who make this all possible and thank you for the gift of your time. I'm so excited that Dr. Talley from Indian Prairie School District, the superintendent, will be doing the introductions. Before we get there, I want to tell you very quickly about what's upcoming. So here's what to look forward to in the next couple of weeks. So tomorrow night in Spanish or in English, we'll be talking once again, I think you can't discuss this enough, about college admission. A special guest, Timothy Fields from Emory University, will be talking about his book, Black Families Guide to Colleges. That's at 7 p.m. tomorrow. And then there'll be a panel of experts talking about financial aid, etc. The following week, we'll be welcoming Anna Hamayoun. Her book is called Erasing the Finish Line. And what Anna will be talking about on the 10th is it really about a fat, thick envelope, or is it really about preparing your child for the skills once they get to college, once they have their career, and for a lifetime? So we'll be talking about a blueprint, the essential skills for better grades, less stress, more free time for success in all those different areas. Emily Hamblett will be with us on December 11th. Her book is called 7 Steps to College Success for Students with Disabilities. So please join us or let someone know that might be of interest to them. We know that so many of our students are struggling with social relationships. And so Timothy Wahlberg will join us on the 17th at noon and 7 p.m. about how to strengthen those socialization skills for better interpersonal relationships. We don't have the slides up for January, but I must tell you about the special events that we have planned in January. Ellen Bratton will be talking about bright kids who couldn't care less on the 9th. Bruce Perry will be discussing trauma on January 15th. Ellen Galinsky has an important book. Her previous book was Mind in the Making. This book is called The Breakthrough Years, a New Scientific Framework for Raising Thriving Teens on January 22nd. Sam Quinones will be talking about the fentanyl crisis on the 29th. And because we have programming across the lifespan, important program for the young families, the importance of play, little moments for big connections for happy, healthy children. That's on January 30th. Please go to the website, gpsparentseries.org. You will find this information with all of our past programs there for you to share and enjoy. Without further ado, Dr. Adrienne Talley, thank you so much for joining us tonight, Superintendent of Indian Prairie School District 204, who has the honor of the introductions. Dr. Talley, thank you.
Thank you, Gilda. Appreciate that. Tonight, I'm introducing Dr. Emily Edlynn. She completed her doctoral degree at Loyola University, Chicago, specializing in clinical psychology for children and adolescents. Emily worked in academic medicine at 2 large urban children's hospitals. Then she shifted to private practice and freelance writing about parenting in 2017, including starting a parenting blog focused on science-based guidance. She is the author of Autonomy, Supportive Parenting, Reduce Parenting Burnout and Raise Competent, Confident Children, and In Your Fields, a journal to explore your emotions for 8 to 12-year-olds. She also writes an advice column for parents.com and has been featured in several national media outlets as a parenting expert. Currently, she co-hosts the popular podcast titled Psychologist Off the Clock. We are delighted, and I am honored to welcome her to GPS tonight. Emily?
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, Dr. Talley. Thank you, Gilda, for organizing this. And inviting me to be a part of this amazing resource that you provide for parents and families. And I want to thank every single person who has donated their cherished time on a Wednesday evening to listen to this talk. I know it's so hard in our busy family lives to make time for these things. So, oh, and my dogs are introducing themselves. I tried my best to hide them, but they don't always listen, kind of like children sometimes. So hopefully they'll settle down. I usually like to kind of get a vibe from the audience, and I don't think we have a way to do that necessarily through like the chat or anything. We can? Okay. So I love to hear from people if they're currently parenting, how old their kids are. So if parents are currently maybe in raising a college student versus high schoolers, middle schoolers, elementary, toddlers and preschoolers, or little babies. Okay, so I can already see that we're really across the spectrum. All experiences are represented here, which I absolutely love that. I am currently parenting a 15-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 10-year-old. So I have an elementary student, last year of elementary school, middle schooler, and a first year of high schooler. So I'm kind of in all the phases right now. All right, so I'm going to pull up my slides. Great. Okay. So I always like to start by asking parents, how are you? And I can't really see you, but I want you to think about how are you? And how is your stress level today? And how has your stress level been this week, especially December? And how has your stress been since you brought home your first child? So if you are anything like a majority of parents in this country, you are overwhelmed. For some, there we go. So I don't know if you're familiar, but the US Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, recently in August released an advisory declaring parent stress a public health issue. A couple of tidbits from this advisory is that 70% of parents say that parenting is more difficult today than it was 20 years ago. 41% of parents say that most days they are so stressed they cannot function. And 48% of parents say that most days their stress is completely overwhelming. And this is compared to adults without children at 20% and 26% respectively. So this is a really dramatic difference. And I think Dr. Murthy is in the best position to call our attention to it. I will say that those of us writing about parenting for a living have been beating this drum for a while, that parents are highly stressed and burning out. So Dr. Murthy identifies a few sources of stress for parents these days, and those include financial stress, time demands, children's health and safety, parental isolation and loneliness, technology and social media, children's futures, and social and cultural pressures on parents. So I'm starting with this context because this is laying out the foundation of why there needs to be change, that this is not healthy. Very fundamentally, unhealthy parents have a harder time raising healthy children. We know from the science that there is a downstream effect of parent well-being on child well-being, and we need to take parental stress and overwhelm and burnout seriously. We all have too much to do and not enough time, and often not enough money. And the stress and pressures of these modern realities are really crushing us. Today, I'm going to pull out one specific part of this constellation that I am a voice of trying to move the needle on. And this is what a lot of my work revolves around. And I want to start that by asking you to think about how you would define a good parent. What does it mean to you to be a good parent? So, what we're seeing is that what has become the cultural definition of good parenting is very intensive parenting. So that means highly involved in every aspect of our child's lives and putting our children's needs front and center to family life at the expense of our own needs. And this, we see in polls that this is considered the best kind of parenting. There was a recent study where parents across class lines, gender lines reported a preference for what's called concerted cultivation. So concerted cultivation is what I was talking about, where it's this intensive approach of wanting to cultivate your child's environment to be as enriching as possible. And it takes a lot of time and energy to do that. So the survey asked parents to rate that style, concerted cultivation, against natural growth. So natural growth is the idea of kind of allowing children to more organically develop their skills and interests and activities, and there's not as much parent involvement. 75% of the college graduates and non-college graduates rated concerted cultivation as very good or excellent. And 32% of college graduates and 38% of non-college graduates rated the natural growth parenting style very good or excellent. So you can see this huge split on how culturally we're seeing good parenting. So clearly being involved with our children on its own is not a problem. It's very positive for parents to be involved in their children's lives and in their relationships. But we have gone too far where we are doing too much for our children in a way that is not only burning ourselves out, but also undermining our children's growth and opportunity to build their skills and development. So the Surgeon General even included in his report this sentence: cultural expectations, societal norms, and pressure to meet perceived parenting standards can contribute to parental stress. So I am not here to parent shame, because I wanted to really lay out all of this context as evidence that this isn't us doing something wrong. This is a constellation of forces, environmental, external forces, that are putting so much pressure on parents these days. And indeed, it is a very different parenting environment compared to even 20 years ago, or compared to when many of us were being raised by our parents. So I want to validate that we're in a very difficult climate right now in terms of raising our children. The problem is when we are overdoing parenting, and I call it parenting too hard, when we're anxious and stressed and burned out, we're actually not being the parent we want to be. So in this pursuit, this is very ironic, this pursuit of being a good parent, how the culture is defining it, we're actually making it harder for it to feel that way. And what I hear time and time again from parents is they feel like they're a hamster on a wheel, and they are working so hard and they're not getting anywhere. Or they're trying so hard and they still feel like they're either a failure or they're falling behind. And I know from my work as a psychologist and a therapist that this level of guilt and anxiety and insecurity is just not healthy, and it's making our stress worse. and the stress makes those feelings more likely to happen. So how does this all fit into why I'm here tonight and what I'm going to talk about? This combination of overwhelming stress and unrealistic social and cultural expectations makes us all parent harder, not smarter. And we fall into what is considered controlling parenting, which is doing too much for our kids, including solving their problems and burning ourselves out. So I want to take a minute to say that in the research, they talk about controlling parenting in one way. It's very science-based, and this is, overly directing kids, telling them what to do, not giving them choices. And then there's also the type of controlling that is more about that concerted cultivation of trying to really control a child's environment to be as enriching as possible. So I want to validate again that when we are stressed, it is so easy to fall into controlling parenting. So here are some examples of when we're really tired, we're more likely to invalidate our child's experience, to order them around, to not really stop to understand what's going on with them, and resort to threats and punishment because they feel just faster and easier. And sometimes they're effective, but not always. Sometimes they cause more problems. But there's that kind of day-to-day controlling that is rooted in our own internal stress, and we're less patient. That's the other theme I hear so much from parents, is feeling like they aren't a calm enough parent, and think about how stress affects our patience levels. So we're more impatient with our kids, and we're more directive and controlling. And then we have the enrichment piece, and I want people to think about how much time they spend on registering all those registration forms, putting the apps on their phones, organizing carpools, updating the family calendar, filling out or going to meetings, right? All the Zoom meetings. There is so many hours we're spending that aren't even with our children. They're on behalf of our children. They're not even with our children. And this gets back to what the data is showing, and what was part of the Surgeon General's report is that we are spending more hours than ever on these parenting tasks. So again, not necessarily being with our children, just parenting tasks. And we're working more hours than we ever have. So of course, this is a formula for overwhelm and burnout. So I'd like to do a check-in at this point to ask people if they are on board that this maybe isn't working, that this is worth trying to change. And usually when I'm in a room, I see nods, I see head nods. I don't know if it's just being nice to humor me, but I think it's a pretty good case that we're not on a good path here, and it's worth reconsidering how we're approaching parenting as a society. So how do we get to change? How do we get to parenting smarter? I first want to even explain what it means, what I mean when I use this phrase. And that is sorry. How do I go back? Oh, well. So when I say parenting smarter, not harder, I mean, one, to remember the science. So the science is smart, okay? What I have seen happening out there to parents is there is so much pseudoscience and misrepresentation of the science of child development and child psychology and parenting and family systems that it's making parents feel bad, that when parents read this advice and then it doesn't quote unquote work because it's not actually rooted in good science, then they feel like they're failing. that they are the problem. And then there's that internalized guilt and feelings of failure. And then again, that is continuing to drive us from being the parent we really want to be with our kids. So the first part of parenting smarter, not harder, is to remember the good science and being discerning with what you're seeing on Instagram or Facebook or whatever social media platform is rolling across your feed. Is this really true? And being a healthy skeptic. The second part of parenting smarter, not harder, is the idea of being strategic with your time and energy by doing less to get more. And so the most straightforward way to think of that is that when we as parents do less for our children, then they by nature are doing more. So in that formula, we're doing less, we're worrying less about doing it all, and our kids are growing independence and self-sufficiency. So it is truly a win-win. So what I hear from people is, that sounds great, Emily, great ideas, but how? How does this actually happen? Oops, oh my gosh. There we go. Okay, so I want to ask everyone what they think of when they hear the word autonomy. And this is actually a really broad concept that's kind of complicated, which is why I spend time on it. But I'm wondering what comes up for people. And thank you for using the chat. Agency and choice, yes. I think someone may have been at my talk earlier today. We'll cheat. That's okay. Anyone else want to venture into the chat and share what they think of when they hear the word autonomy? Most people, what I hear is independence. And that is, I think, the most easily interchanged word with autonomy is independence. And independence is certainly a key part of autonomy, and also I think more of an outgrowth of autonomy. But autonomy is so much more than independence. Autonomy is agency, feeling a sense of choice. Choicefulness is central to autonomy, feeling freedom, having a strong sense of self, and feeling like you are living by your values. So that is living an autonomous life. So next, I can't see you all, but I'm just going to ask you to close your eyes, get reflective for a few moments. I can't double check on you, so I won't. You can do it however you want. But I want you to think of a time in your life when you have felt the most autonomous. So that could be at work or in a relationship. But when have you felt like you had choices, like you had a say over what was going on, like you matter, when your ideas mattered, when you felt understood and accepted exactly for who you are, and you feel the freedom to be yourself and act by your values? Okay. I like, yes, before we had children, isn't that the truth? I'm so glad someone said that, because I actually was gonna, I didn't say it earlier in the talk earlier today, but it's like the ultimate shuffling of autonomy to become a parent, right? Because all of a sudden, when they are tiny, they need all of you all the time. And so you actually do lose autonomy as a parent in the beginning. Part of this process, and what I'm talking about with autonomy supportive parenting, is finding our own autonomy again. getting it back in our role as parent. We can be autonomous as parents. It just takes a little more effort. And parents who feel more autonomy are more autonomy supportive with their kids. So this is across the science, which makes sense because our needs are better met, and then we can meet our kids' needs better. Okay. Next, I want you to close your eyes again, and I want you to reflect on a time in your life when you felt controlled. So again, this could be in a relationship or in a job. I think it's very likely in the workplace to feel controlled, or maybe even back when you were a child. When did you feel like you didn't have choices? You weren't treated as worthy of sharing your thoughts. Your ideas and wishes were dismissed. Your behavior controlled. You were expected to serve someone else's priorities and agenda. And you just weren't understood for who you are. My guess is most people have had some experience with this. Okay, so I'm hoping, could everyone kind of connect with both feeling autonomous and feeling controlled? I really do appreciate people using the chat. I won't call your names out, but I appreciate it. Okay, so last thought experiment. Now I want you to think of each of your children. And if you also are in a role outside of parenting with kids, you can think, if you're a teacher or you work with children, you can think of your groups of kids. But I want you to reflect on how often you think they feel autonomous and how often they may feel controlled. I mean, the reality of childhood is that you're most of the time being told what to do, right? And you're kind of living a life that's not your choice. Most kids, I mean, thankfully, a lot of kids do love school, but a lot of kids don't love school. And if it were their choice, they wouldn't go to school, right? But we know for their well-being, education is important. But just thinking of the experience of being a child, of how much you are following other people's priorities and agenda. And in some ways that's necessary, but in other ways, it's even more important for us to find where they can feel autonomous so that they're not always feeling controlled. So when you reflected on your own experiences, I'm wondering what felt better. Okay, thank you for sharing. Yes, so I am curious, when you think of feeling autonomous and feeling controlled, and this is a very leading, obvious question, what feels better? And it's autonomy, because first of all, I feel like that's just common sense knowing humans. I mean, we are wired for wanting autonomy. It also maps on to this very well-studied concept called self-determination theory. And I don't know, I went to get my PhD in clinical psychology. I probably learned about it at some point, but I really didn't remember it when I started working on this book. So I'm just going to go ahead and explain it. So self-determination theory was pioneered back in the 80s/early 90s by Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, and they have a whole center for self-determination. If you want to see the links to their dozens and dozens of studies they've done all around the world with all different ages. And basically the finding is that all humans, regardless of cultural context and background, have three fundamental needs: to feel fulfilled in their lives. Those three fundamental needs are autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So we've already talked about autonomy quite a bit. Competence is what it sounds like, but it's important to highlight. Competence is that feeling of having skills and abilities and mastery that you can do the things that lead you to autonomy. So you can make the life that you want to live. Relatedness is that essential sense of emotional safety and connection in relationship, sense of belonging with other people and in community. So these three needs, when they are met, lead to happier and healthier people. Autonomy supportive parenting is parenting in a way that is meeting these fundamental needs of our children. And the research bears out that when autonomy supportive approaches are compared to controlling approaches, that the kids in the autonomy supportive environments do better across the board, and kids who have been in more controlling environments have higher risks for things like depression, anxiety, and substance use. But I think if we just take a step back and think about the human experience, this science matches common sense, right? In fact, Gilda Glenbard promoted this talk as common sense parenting, which I love because it is. It's kind of like we've lost track here of what just makes sense. And I'm hoping by the end of this, all of this will make sense. Okay, so what exactly is it though? Okay, I've gone into the theory, a little bit of the science, but what the heck is autonomy supportive parenting? First of all, it's very annoying to say over and over. It's even more annoying to type it hundreds of times for my book. And I was sharing earlier today that I actually didn't want to call my book Autonomy Supportive Parenting. It's so sciencey, it's just jargony. It is not sexy in any way, but I lost to my publisher's opinion. So we went with this, and this is what we have. But I do want to rebrand it, and maybe I'll go with common sense parenting. But one other idea I thought of was this just right parenting and kind of this Goldilocks effect. So when we think about this continuum of kids needing structure, but also freedom, we on one side have permissive parenting, which features very little structure. So not many rules, not a lot of limits, not a lot of expectations for the kids, and tons of freedom. So they have lots of choice and freedom, but not a lot of structure around them. Now we know from the science that a lot of times these parents are very warm, they're very loving parents, but the lack of structure isn't great for child development overall. Then we have the other side of the continuum, which is controlling parenting. And that is featured by very rigid, inflexible structure. So rules, limits, expectations that are not to change ever. They're very rigid, very strict. And children have a low sense of freedom in that kind of environment. So they don't feel like they have much choice or agency. They have a lot of rules and limits, but not a lot of choice and agency. So then in this just right middle comes autonomy supportive parenting, where there is structure. And this is something I really like to debunk, because sometimes people hear, oh, so to parent for my child's autonomy means they get to do whatever they want. Absolutely not. That is not good for children. That is not actually autonomy. That's a misunderstanding of the word. But I don't blame people don't study it like I do. But absolutely not. Autonomy includes healthy limits. So when I talk about structure with autonomy supportive parenting, it's a flexible structure. There are rules, there are limits, there are expectations of the child, but they aren't as rigid. They can change based on the child changing. Or let's say the child has some good reasoning for wanting a different rule. There's openness to the child's input and some collaboration if it's reasonable. So then that level of structure combines with freedom that is balanced with responsibility. So children have a sense of choice and agency within the limits and structure, but this includes responsibility to follow what's expected. Okay. So I shared earlier that soon after I finished my manuscript and turned it in, I was very proud of myself. I had written a book, one of my lifelong dreams. And I was cleaning up the kitchen one night with my middle child who had recently turned 11. And my personal theory is that 11 is the new 13. And there's a new sass that comes along and speaking up in different ways in that developmental transition. So my very, very sweet, easygoing, lovely middle child was giving me some sass as we were cleaning up in the kitchen. And I said to her, you know, I love you even when you're sassy. And she looked at me and she said, well, I love you even when you're controlling. And at first I was stunned. And then I just burst out laughing. And she looked at me a little concerned. Why is mom laughing so hard? And I told her, I said, I just wrote a book about how to not be controlling. And you just called me controlling. She was very sweet. She said, oh, but you're very nice too. And I think what was happening is I was probably being controlling as we were cleaning the kitchen, like kind of correcting her and telling her how to do it better. But I share this story because we are all on a continuum every day, from permissive to controlling. And if there's one gripe I have with so much parenting advice, it's this impression that we're supposed to do it a certain way all the time. Every minute, every interaction, every day, we need to do it just the specific way to get it right. I am here to debunk that for autonomy supportive parenting. We are going for human level consistency. We are aspiring to create an autonomy supportive home in general, most of the time. We will have our permissive days. If we're sick, if we're on a tight work deadline and we're really stressed, we may just be like, I don't care how many TV shows you watch or what you eat, right? That's okay. There are other times when we're really stressed that we are going to be more controlling. And there may be times our child is going through something where we actually have to be more controlling for their safety and well-being, and that is okay. But in general, what we want to be thinking of is, are we creating a home where our child most of the time feels like they have choice, feels like they have some agency in the way they live their lives, and feels like they can come to us with their ideas, that we care about what they think, that we want to understand who they are as a person, that we'll be open to their ideas and collaborate with them. So I just want to be very balanced about this. What is the general environment that we're creating? So those would be the elements of an autonomy supportive or just right family and home. Our children feel like they have choices. They feel like their opinions matter. There are clear rules and limits in the family, but also our children feel like they can come to us to make changes in those rules if they have good reasoning. Okay. Now I get asked, but okay, what do we actually do? And this is another thing I see a lot. I read a lot of parenting books, as you can imagine. And a lot of times it sounds so good. There's such a great theory and ideas and beautiful stories, but I still don't know what to do, right? Like, what do I actually do with my child in my house? So that is what we were going to get into next. So I read books, dozens of academic articles, peer-reviewed studies to extract what are the actual strategies that are nurturing these fundamental needs of autonomy, competence, and relatedness in our kids. Because my mission with my book was to translate the science into actual real life. So I combed the research for a long time to extract these themes and these top 10 tools. And I want to start illustrating this top set of tools with my own lived experience with my oldest child. Is unfortunately my greatest teacher, since I get to go through everything first with her. But when she had the very tricky transition to middle school, and I don't know if I know there are parents of teenagers, so I know that you've been through that transition. And it's a really hard one. It's well known that, for example, friend groups shake up a lot in that transition. And so when she was at the beginning of 6th grade, 11 years old, she was starting to feel like her best friend wasn't a good fit for who my daughter was becoming. Now, the complication here is that we were good friends with the parents, and then the sisters of our kids were close friends. And we as families have spent a lot of time together, especially with COVID. And so one night, the mother of my friend's or my daughter's friend shared with me something, I can't even remember what it is, to be honest, but something unkind, something that had hurt her daughter's feelings that my daughter had done. And my initial reaction was I was embarrassed. And the thought running through my head was, I didn't raise my child to act like that. Like that's not how we treat people. Where's the respect? Where's the kindness? Thinking about values. So I was pretty upset. I shared the incident with my husband, and we were both kind of heated. And I remember we were making dinner. It was a Friday night, and we were just kind of, volleying back and forth the same thoughts. And then my husband looked at me and he said, well, what would your framework say? And I thought, oh, well, first, it's not my framework. I did not make this up. However, it's a very good question. What would I counsel someone else to do that would be an autonomy supportive response? And I said, well, first of all, we need to calm down. Second of all, we need to really try and understand her experience of this situation before we come at her with our lecture, which will feel very judgmental. And so we need to use curiosity and open-ended questions to really empathize. So first to understand what her experience is, then express empathy, and then really express how much we love her, no matter how hard this is and how much she's struggling, right? So once we were calm, we kind of had this plan. We asked our daughter to come talk to us. I'll never forget where we were sitting on the couch. She was right in between us. And we kind of asked her what was going on with this friendship and what had happened in this instance. And the floodgates opened. She was 11 years old. She was going through her separation thing from the family. And she shared so much about what was so hard for her in this situation. And we were able to truly empathize and understand her experience. And we were able to give her some coaching on how to do this. And I realized, she's 11. She doesn't have these skills yet. This is hard. This is a very hard situation. when you have a different feeling about a longtime close friend and it's just not the same as it used to be. And she doesn't know how to handle it. So I want you to think about what would have happened if we went with our original instincts to basically say to her, what were you thinking? How could you do this? Right? Do the lecture, be judgmental. What would have happened? She would have zipped her lips, shut down, probably stormed off, completely disconnected. And what wouldn't have happened? We wouldn't have had our opportunity to give her some coaching and for her to learn a little bit about how to deal with this difficult situation. So I really realized the power of these tools, using empathy, taking your child's perspective, showing unconditional love and acceptance. The power of that, which is part of the relatedness, is really building that trust in having open communication. Because what would happen if we had done it our initial instinct way and she would have shut down and we would have been disconnected? Does she feel like coming back to us when she has another problem? And I realized this is such a sensitive age. She's going to be going through so much in the next few years. I want her to feel like she can talk to us. So this was a really actually pivotal experience for me as a mother, which is why I like to share it, because it really drove home how important this mental shift is. Okay, this next set of skills is building competence. So if we expect our children to do things themselves and make sure they actually can, and express our belief in their abilities, this is what nurtures confidence in their abilities. So this could be via a chore routine, which I highly recommend, but it's also about small moments throughout the day when you see opportunity for your child to jump in and help out. For those of you lucky enough to be raising young children, the toddlers and preschoolers, they are at the height of helpfulness. They have a burning desire to help. The problem is that they're not very helpful with their low skill set, but it's a great time to take advantage of that motivation and just try and find things for them to feel helpful that don't make your life too much harder. But even with our older kids, I think it's reflecting on what am I doing for my child that they can do themselves, and starting to expect more. I think we get into very automatic routines where we are doing a lot. And I'm talking, I hear this from other parents, filling up water bottles, packing backpacks, getting stuff ready for school in the morning. These are things children should be doing for themselves most of the time. So it's really taking a step back and thinking, where can my child be more independent? Because I promise you, even if at first they're like, no, you always do this for me, I don't want to do it myself. But once they start actually doing it, you can tell that they feel more confident in general. And the other thing that can happen over time is if you are doing a bunch of stuff for your kids that they can do for themselves at their ages, they start to internalize a message that they don't think you can do it, or that, yeah, they think you don't think they can do it. And that doesn't feel good. And then they lose confidence. So it's just a really important piece of building competence. I want to take a second to talk about scaffolding. So scaffolding is another jargony term from child development, but the whole idea is to build from skills where they're at. So you need to know where your child's abilities and skills are, and then nudge their growth from where their starting point is. If you start too low and underestimate their abilities, they're bored, and so they check out. But if you shoot too high and you're asking them of something that they can't do, they get overwhelmed and shut down. So the key is really tuning in to where your child's skills at, starting there, and slowly building more and more independence from that starting point. I always like to include a note about kids who are perfectionists or may have anxiety, because this is a very important common thing I see is that they have the skills to do the tasks that you're asking of them. The problem is if they're a perfectionist or they have anxiety, they are scared of doing it wrong and making a mistake. And so then what happens is they just don't do it, and then they're not growing and they get stuck. So it's really important, if we know our child is wired that way, and we recognize that that's the barrier, that we need to very explicitly give them permission to literally and figuratively spill the milk, that it's okay. And then the real trick is that we have to actually be okay when it happens and be supportive. So when my son was younger, he hated pouring that milk into his cereal bowl because it would splash and he didn't like making a mess. But I kept on it and was very cool about the spilled milk on the counter because he needs to be able to make his own cereal. And what I would say is, awesome. Like, you did it, even though that was really heavy and hard to pour, you did it. And most of the milk ended up in the bowl, and you're just going to get better and better at it as you do it. So I think that's just a really important reminder for those of us with those kids that may be perfectionistic or anxious. This last piece, called invite instead of demand, in the literature is described as using flexible language. And this was a really hard one for me to wrap my head around for a while. The idea is trying to do less ordering around overall. So for example, let's say the expectation is they clean their room on Saturdays, right? So in the morning, instead of saying, go clean your room, which what's going to happen? They're going to say no. You say, so what is a good time today for you to clean your room? So you set the expectation is clear that it needs to happen, but they have some choice and agency within that. And the way you're bringing it up is more flexible. All right, all of these are building autonomy. So we've talked a lot about offering choices, and that choicefulness is a really central part of autonomy. But another strategy I have found that parents have this big light bulb go off that they realize, oh my gosh, I could be doing so much more of this, is including their children in problem solving and decision making. So it's so easy to just give our kids the answers if they're struggling with something and they say, Mom, what do I do about this? And you just tell them, because it's easy. We have wisdom. We have so much knowledge to share. But then they're not learning to think for themselves, right? And so the next time saying, well, what do you think? What are your ideas for that? And sometimes they'll say, I don't know. That's why I'm asking you. And that's fine. But it starts to get them to think a little differently and to check in with themselves and their own critical thinking skills. Another important part of building autonomy is including rationale for rules. So this is the opposite of because I said so parenting, right? So it's saying, yeah, you can't play Fortnite for 12 hours because that is not balanced and healthy for your mind and body, right? Yeah, you need a bedtime and you need to get enough sleep because your brain and body depend on that sleep to function. So it's including the reasoning for the rules and limits and expectations. It doesn't mean your children will agree. I'm not promising that at all, but it at least gets them thinking about the reasoning. These aren't just arbitrary, my parents are so mean rules. And then finally, when you are especially dealing with parenting dilemmas, kind of stress points with your kids, remember to talk about values. So what are your family values? What are your personal values? Your job is you're teaching your child to learn what their values are. And we want to transmit our own values as parents, but we also need to be open that our children are going to be developing their own personal set. But when we're talking about like friendships and the changing friendships, to couch it in, how do you show respect? Like, respect is an important value in our family. We respect people, even if we don't agree with them, even if they've hurt our feelings, we still show respect. So it's remembering to include that language. Okay, so how this all works is so cool. All of this is building kids' internal motivation. And so this is truly the point of parenting, is that over time and over kids having more autonomy and competence and relatedness, what's happening is that they are becoming more and more intrinsically motivated, including for things they don't want to do, because they get it, they understand it, they feel competent, they feel loved, they feel accepted for who they are. So they will do the things that aren't preferred in their lives. So the real beauty of this is that over time, our kids will internalize our limits as their own. And so this is building a kind of self-regulation where they're gonna like know when is too much time on Fortnite instead of waiting for you to tell them when it's too much time on Fortnite. And this is building healthy adults. So I have heard, this is my favorite part of doing this work, and my book came out just over a year ago. And I love hearing from people how when this approach really clicks in their head and they start doing things differently, how much they've seen change in their families. And I've seen it in my family too, as I've done more of it, but it is not just anecdotal. This approach has so much science behind it and so much evidence. And what the research shows consistently across ages is that kids growing up in an autonomy supportive environment have higher self-esteem, greater life satisfaction, fewer psychological problems, stronger academic achievement, greater internal motivation. They're more engaged in school, have more positive attitudes towards school. They have more empathy and perspective taking and social relationships, and stronger social connections. So once you master just right or autonomy supportive parenting, life will be easy, right? No fights, no power struggles, no rule breaking. No, if only. And this is what really bothers me about so much parenting guidance is there's like this false promise underlying it that it'll be easier if you do it this way. Parenting is not supposed to be easy. If you think about it, we are messy humans. Our children are even messier humans. Humans are complex. There will be conflict. There will be times of pain and struggle because we are humans in relationship with each other. And our children's brains are growing and they have a lot to learn. It's not supposed to be easy, but I do believe, and I have seen how this approach makes things feel better overall. And in some ways, it has made my life easier. My kids, they make their own food, they do their own laundry, they pack their luggage for trips, they don't fight with me over screen time anymore. Things are very clear. So there are ways that things are easier, but in general, usually if you're parenting right, it's hard. It's hard. It's complicated. So I'm not going to make you false promises. But one thing is, I will say, if you adopt an autonomy supportive mindset by being curious about your child's experience, ask open-ended questions, see more opportunities for them to be helpful, ask them their opinions, encourage them to make their own decisions and solve their own problems, you will notice a difference. I hear this from people all around me, and I have lived it myself. So thank you so much for being here tonight. I really appreciate it.
Excellent, Emily. We've got time for a couple of questions. You mentioned this morning about the challenge, especially in the teen years, so we speak to that with this kind of parenting.
Yes. So the adolescence is marked by this strong drive for autonomy. And so what happens then is they are wanting to be very far from us in some ways and differentiate themselves. So in that separation, it can feel to us like we're being rejected, that we're doing something wrong, that, and we want to pull them back in. But actually, if we can support that kind of level of separation, that's really, really healthy for them. And it is tuning into, are they getting their needs met for autonomy? That is so important in that age.
I've been hearing so many over the years. I think of Madeline Levine, do not do for your child what they can do for themselves. Do not do for your child what they can almost do for themselves. Something I never realized until your talk tonight. I think about in my own situation, my own family, with a controlling parent, a sibling felt so controlled that it was more that it caused a sort of reaction to her good advice.
Mm,
So that just get to me yet another reason why you want to build that.
yes.
Last question, unless someone has one as we come to a close. Um, if you've never been that kind of a parent before,
Yeah.
and now it's not working, as you said,
Right.
how
Right.
do I build the steps to autonomy supported parenting?
And so I hear this a lot because most of us probably had controlling parents to some degree because authoritarian parenting was more the norm. And so most parents these days are trying to parent in different ways than they were parented. And it's a challenge because we don't have our own template for it personally, like our own lived experience. But I see over and over how parents succeed at being different. And part of it is this openness of and motivation to be different and openness to new information and ways of thinking and ways of relating to our children and our experience of parent as being a parent. So I think that openness and motivation is everything, and the tools will click in once you have that openness and just have faith that you can do it differently. And if you revert back to controlling ways because you were raised that way and it's a time of stress, have grace with yourself that you're doing the best you can and it's not all for naught, and you just keep trying every day.
You're reminding me of one other thought that really guides me. That sometimes when we overdo for them, we're really denying them the benefit of whatever success comes from that over controlling. That can be a guide. I know it's been a guide for me with all the mistakes that I've made. But if we stay calm, we'd be interested, we trust in them.
Yes.
And I can see this is not easy. This is
Right.
not easy.
Right.
But we'll keep reminding ourselves of all of the benefits of this balancing of structure and freedom to benefit our kids. What a great discussion. I really, really appreciate it so much. Been wonderful spending the day with you, Dr. Edlynn, and I can't wait till we do it again.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone who was here tonight with their time. I appreciate it.
This is where we go hug the kids.
Yeah,
So
I
let's
love
go hug the kids.
it.
Thank you, everybody.
All
See
right.
you next time.
Have a good night.